Hello, and welcome to English Through Stories, the channel where you can listen to engaging episodes, enjoy a variety of topics, and improve English fluency. Each one repeats useful grammar, phrases, and vocabulary in context, so you can start to remember them naturally and use them yourself.
Scene 1. A boy from Indiana, 1890s. In the quiet town of Henryville, Indiana, the Sanders family was living in a simple farmhouse. The rooms were plain, the walls unpainted, and the furniture simple. Beyond the windows stretched wide fields of corn, and wagons often creaked along the dusty roads. In that house, a boy named Harland David Sanders came into the world. His life would be shaped less by comfort and more by hardship. When Harland was just 5 years old, tragedy struck. His father, who had been working as a farmer and butcher, died suddenly. The small farmhouse fell into silence. His mother, left with 3 children, had to take any work she could find. Often she was leaving home before sunrise and was returning late at night, her face lined with exhaustion. For many children in Henryville, childhood meant laughter, running, and games in the fields. But for Harland, it meant responsibility. While others were chasing each other through tall grass, Harland was standing on a stool beside the family's old iron stove. His small hands were stirring pots, his eyes were watching the flames, and his ears were listening carefully for the bubbling sound of boiling water. By the age of 7, he could already prepare bread, beans, and vegetables. The kitchen became his classroom, and every mistake, burnt bread, overcooked beans, was a lesson. He didn't always enjoy the work, but he carried it with endurance. Each time he was chopping onions until his eyes watered, he reminded himself that his mother and siblings depended on him. The neighbors often noticed. "That Sanders boy is always cooking," they whispered. To some it seemed unusual, but Harland didn't mind. Cooking gave him control in a world that felt unstable. When his siblings were crying from hunger, he was preparing food that gave them comfort. The small successes in the kitchen gave him a sense of hope. School, however, told a different story. Harland struggled with lessons. He grew impatient with teachers and sometimes argued. On bad days, he simply walked out. By 7th grade, his formal education ended. Instead of sitting at a desk, he was collecting experiences in daily survival. While his classmates were writing in notebooks, Harland was carrying buckets of water, was cutting vegetables, and was cleaning the small farmhouse kitchen. It was not just survival, it was shaping him. Cooking taught him discipline. Caring for his younger siblings taught him duty. Enduring poverty gave him resilience. Even at that young age, Harland was showing the tenacity that would define him later in life. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by while Harland was frying bread in a pan. The woman watched him work and laughed gently. "Why, Harland, you cook better than most grown men." Harland didn't smile. He only nodded and turned the bread carefully so it wouldn't burn. The compliment planted a seed in his mind. Perhaps this skill, learned out of necessity, was something valuable. But Harland's life wasn't only in the kitchen. He and his family often were moving from one place to another, searching for stability. Each move meant new faces, new challenges, and more uncertainty. While other children were settling into steady routines, Harland was adapting, finding ways to keep going. Looking back many years later, Sanders admitted that his boyhood was not filled with joy. But he also believed those years gave him his greatest strength. The loss of his father, the endless chores, the quiet hours at the stove, all of it forced him to grow up early. Life itself had become his school, and cooking had become his lesson. Micro turning point. The death of his father and the responsibilities that followed forced Harland into the kitchen, where he unknowingly began developing the skill that would define his legacy. Let's pause here for a quick past continuous practice. This is a great moment for English fluency practice. His mother was leaving home before sunrise and was returning late at night. Harland was standing on a stool beside the stove. He was stirring pots and was listening for the boiling water. That's 3 sentences practiced. Great work. Keyword: endurance. Endurance means the ability to keep going, even when something is tiring or difficult. Scene 2. Restless youth, wandering paths. 1900s to 1910s. By his early teens, Harland wanted to prove he could carry a man's load. Before dawn, he was walking down frozen lanes to a nearby farm, and by sunrise he was feeding animals, was hauling water in metal buckets, and was shoveling hay until his arms ached. The pay was small, but the routine taught him discipline. While other boys were talking about baseball and summer fairs, Harland was calculating how many hours it would take to buy new boots. When the farm work ended, he tried the city. As a streetcar conductor, he was collecting fares and was calling out stop names in a steady voice. Older men joked with him. Children stared at his serious expression. Even then, he was carrying himself like someone older, as if hardship had borrowed time from his childhood. But he was restless. A conductor's cap felt like a lid on his head. He wanted air, change, motion. The railroad gave him that. Soon he was hearing engines whistle through the yards, was smelling coal smoke, and was lifting couplers with fast, practiced hands. Night shifts followed day shifts. He slept little, ate quickly, and held his temper unevenly. Supervisors sometimes pushed too hard, and Harland pushed back. That trait, half fire, half pride, was getting him in trouble as much as it was saving him from being ignored. Even his mistakes, he later said, were teaching him resilience and endurance. At 16, impatient to be useful, he lied about his age and enlisted. For 6 months in Cuba, he was serving in a uniform that felt too big on the first day and exactly right by the last. The army didn't make him gentle, but it gave him rhythm. March, clean, check, repeat. He was learning to keep his bunk tight, his boots clean, his mouth shut when it mattered. That steady pattern strengthened his discipline, even if the adventure itself proved short. When he came home, the spinning of jobs began again. He was helping a blacksmith in a forge that glowed red in winter and burned white in summer. He was working on a ferry boat that was cutting the river's brown surface like a knife. The ferry suited him best. The current always moved, so did the faces. A farmer was muttering about prices. A mother was soothing a child. A clerk was reading a newspaper in the wind. Harland liked seeing stories pass across the deck. In the quiet minutes, he was leaning on the rail, was watching the water fold behind the boat, and was thinking that life might be a river, not a road. The idea of business ownership started as a small spark then, a pocket-sized ambition he scarcely named. Another path tempted him: law. He bought correspondence lessons and was studying late at night, was copying definitions, was practicing arguments in a whisper so he wouldn't wake anyone. In Little Rock, he talked his way into small cases, and for a short season, he was practicing law for real. He liked the clean lines of rules, the weight of words, but his temper, the same one that had barked at bosses, did not disappear in a suit. One afternoon, in a courtroom heavy with dust and heat, he argued too hard. Another man argued harder, and soon Harland was shouting when he should have been silent. The incident ended the experiment. Law slipped away like a rope, burned through the hands. Later, he told friends he had lacked the cool patience law demanded, but the effort had sharpened his perseverance to find work that fit his hands as well as his head. Money came in bumps and dips. Some weeks he was paying rent on time. Other weeks he was selling small things to close the gap. He was proud, sometimes too proud, and being told what to do by men he didn't respect was rubbing him the wrong way. He wanted stability, but he also wanted air in his lungs. space to make decisions without a finger tapping his shoulder. The conflict between those needs was pulling him from job to job. Through all of it, cooking stayed. If a rooming house neighbor looked tired, Harland was frying a pan of potatoes and onions. If a coworker had a birthday, he was baking a simple cake with whatever he could find. Over a hot stove, he was calm. Over a plate, he was generous. People said kind things about his food. They meant it. Their praise didn't sound like workplace courtesy. It sounded like truth. This was the one area where his work felt clean, where the results matched the effort. In the kitchen, he found authenticity, a straight line from intention to flavor. When the ferry job ended and the brief law career collapsed, he sat on a wooden step behind a boarding house and thought about what he could do better than most. He was tracing his odd map of jobs in his mind: farmhand, conductor, rail yard worker, soldier, blacksmith's helper, ferryman, almost lawyer. The lines didn't connect, except when they ran through a stove. The conclusion pressed on him quietly, like a friend's hand on his shoulder. Maybe he had been practicing for years without knowing it. Maybe the thing he did for others after work, those meals, was the center, not the edge. He didn't yet have a plan, only a direction. But directions matter. A compass is not a road, yet it points. In the seasons ahead, when life was twisting again, that quiet compass would be there. And the more he trusted it, the more his scattered attempts would begin to gather into purpose. Scene 3, Marriage, Family, and More Failures, 1910s to 1920s. By his late teens, Harland wanted more than drifting jobs. He longed for stability, a family, and a chance to be respected in his community. In 1908, at just 18 years old, he married Josephine King. For a brief season, it looked as though his restless path had finally found a steady road. Josephine's family admired her new husband's confidence, and Harland himself was imagining a life that would feel anchored, not adrift. At first, things seemed hopeful. He found work selling insurance, walking door to door through neighborhoods, his hat in hand, his voice steady with practiced lines. Each morning, he was polishing his shoes and was rehearsing speeches before knocking on strangers' doors. Some weeks he was signing policies and was earning enough to keep the family afloat. But other weeks, sales collapsed. The unpredictability left Josephine anxious. She had grown up expecting security. What she received instead was uncertainty. Still, the couple kept building a life. Their first child came, then another, and finally a third. At night, while Josephine was soothing crying babies, Harland was reading booklets about new ways to sell, was calculating commissions, and was promising himself that tomorrow would bring better results. The sound of children in the house filled him with joy, but also with fear. The duty of fatherhood pressed heavily on his shoulders. The tension between Harland's fiery independence and Josephine's desire for routine grew sharper each year. He was trying new ventures, sometimes selling insurance, other times managing service stations, and even exploring law again. Every time he was chasing opportunity, something seemed to collapse beneath him. An argument with a supervisor, a business downturn, or his own restless spirit ended the job. Josephine, tired of promises and half-built successes, began losing faith. She wanted a husband who came home at the same time each night, who handed over a paycheck that didn't vanish with the next layoff. Instead, Harland often was disappearing into new schemes, only to return with frustration in his eyes. The neighbors whispered about him. Why can't Sanders hold a job? Why is he always starting over? At the kitchen table, the arguments grew. Josephine was demanding reliability, and Harland was defending his dreams. The children sometimes were hiding in corners while their parents clashed. Slowly, the weight of hardship cracked the marriage. One day, Josephine left, taking the children with her. For Harland, the silence of the house afterward was heavier than any shift he had ever worked. Alone, he was renting small rooms near whichever job he found next. Nights felt endless. He was sitting on wooden chairs in half-lit kitchens, eating simple meals by himself, listening to the hum of the street outside. He thought about his children constantly, was imagining them growing taller without him, was wondering if they remembered his stories or his cooking. Loneliness mixed with anger. His life, he felt, was a string of failures tied together by stubbornness. And yet, inside the grief, something refused to die. Harlan's perseverance, tested again and again, kept him moving. He threw himself into work, taking jobs at oil companies, selling tires, or managing service stations. Each time he promised himself he would last. Each time he started strong, customers liked him. He shook hands firmly, he talked easily, and he worked hard. But soon the same pattern returned. Conflict, layoffs, or his own temper ended the position. During those years of loneliness, one comfort remained: cooking. Wherever he went, the stove followed him. When co-workers stopped by, Harlan was preparing meals, serving simple dishes with pride. He discovered people admired his food more than his speeches or sales pitches. A plate of fried chicken drew real smiles, not polite ones. In the warmth of their praise, he found a flicker of hope. Perhaps the thing he had carried from childhood, the skillet, the spoon, the patient eye for timing, was more valuable than all the jobs he kept losing. The image of his father's absence never left him. He didn't want to be remembered as the man who couldn't provide, who let his family slip away. Though Josephine was gone, though his children were far, Harlan refused to give up on himself. He believed, stubbornly, defiantly, that there was still something inside him worth building. Let's pause again for more practice in the past continuous. This is a perfect time to repeat and build fluency. Every night, Harlan was experimenting in the kitchen. He was mixing spices, was scribbling notes, and was tasting chicken. Night after night, he was testing cooking times and was adjusting temperatures. That's 15 total sentences. Fantastic consistency. Keyword: innovation. Innovation means creating something new and useful. Harlan's pressure-fried chicken was a true innovation.